the Seven Hermetic Principles. The principles of truth are seven. He who knows these, understandingly, possesses the magic key before whose touch all the doors of the temple fly open. The Kybalion. Most people live in reaction mode. Their attention gets hijacked, their emotions swing, and life feels random, even when it isn't. Tonight, the goal is simple. Replace that randomness with a usable map. The Seven Hermetic Principles are taught as 7 laws: mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender. Together, they claim to explain how reality behaves and how a person can work with those laws instead of being pushed around by them. So, if you've ever felt stuck in the same cycles, pulled to extremes, or carried by circumstances you don't fully understand, this is where you begin. Because once you can name the mechanism, you can change your position inside it. Welcome back, Seeker. Within the next few minutes, you will understand what these principles claim, how they connect, and how to apply them in modern life, without losing their original power. The 7 Hermetic Principles, upon which the entire Hermetic philosophy is based, are as follows. 1. The principle of mentalism. 2. The principle of correspondence. 3. The principle of vibration. 4. The principle of polarity. 5. The principle of rhythm. 6. The principle of cause and effect. 7. The principle of gender. These 7 principles will be discussed and explained in depth in the succeeding videos as we proceed. A short explanation of each, however, may as well be given at this point. But as we go, listen closely. Each principle is not just an idea, it's a lens, a way to interpret your experience. And lenses don't merely describe reality. They shape what you notice, what you ignore, and what you believe you can change. We begin with the first because it's the root of all the rest. So, we will take them in order, exactly as presented, because the sequence matters. Each principle builds the next, like stones in an arch. And by the end, you won't just remember the names, you'll feel the structure. 1. The principle of mentalism. The all is mind, the universe is mental. This is the root, the foundation. Reality is mind-like at its core. The claim is simple, but vast. The mind is not a small thing trapped inside the skull. Mind is the underlying nature of reality. When it says the all, it speaks of the ultimate reality beneath appearances, beneath matter, energy, phenomena, life as we perceive it. In other words, what we call the material universe, matter, energy, life, phenomena, is an expression within that larger mind. And when it says the universe is mental, it means the cosmos is not dead machinery. It is mind-like in its essence, structured, ordered, lawful, intelligible. Now pause, because this is where people either lean in or pull away. If you lean in, you begin to see why this principle comes first. Because if the universe is mental in nature, then the mind is not a side effect of reality. The mind is a feature of reality, a primary layer. And suddenly, your attention, your beliefs, your imagination, your focus, doesn't feel like a private hobby happening behind your face. It feels like a force participating in the world. Now, let's make this digestible in modern times. You already live inside this principle every day, without naming it, because your experience of reality is always filtered through your mind. 2 people can stand in the same room and live in different worlds. One sees opportunity, another sees a threat. One hears criticism, another hears instruction. One feels stuck, other feels redirected. Same external facts, different inner universe. Mentalism is the principle that says, to change your life, start by understanding the mental layer where life is interpreted, organized, and experienced. This is not a denial of the physical world. It's mastery of the gateway through which the physical world becomes meaningful. And once you grasp this, a door opens. It implies that once you understand the mental nature of the universe, you can apply mental laws deliberately instead of accidentally. Like a person who stops knocking on doors at random and finally learns which door leads where. If the mind is primary, then laws of mind matter, attention matters, belief matters, imagination matters. Not as fantasy, but as the workshop where future actions are shaped through attraction and the creation of reality. Before we go deeper into the rituals of the higher degrees, it is a prerequisite to master this principle first. So, here is your first practical exercise and contemplate on it. If you cannot govern your attention, you cannot govern your life. Because whatever holds your attention becomes your reality, emotionally, behaviorally, and eventually circumstantially. If you've ever felt your life shifting based on your inner state, how fear attracts more fear, how confidence changes your decisions, how attention makes certain outcomes more likely, you already understand the psychological shadow of this principle. So, mentalism is the master key because it places the seat of mastery where it actually begins, within the mind. It turns the entire universe into something that can be approached through mental laws. But the next question is immediate. If the mind is the basis, then what are the levels of reality within the mind? How do we read the layers? That leads to the second principle. 2. The principle of correspondence. As above, so below, as below, so above. This is the bridge principle. Correspondence claims that there is a relationship between levels of reality, between planes of being. It speaks of material, mental, and spiritual planes, and it argues that laws repeat, patterns echo, and the structure of one layer can help you understand another. In plain English, patterns repeat across scale. The small reflects the large, the inner mirrors the outer, the personal repeats in the collective, the unseen expresses itself through the seen. You can understand this without mysticism. Here's how it works as a method. You don't know what happens above, beyond your senses, beyond your ordinary awareness. So you study what happens below, in what you can observe. Then you reason upward. You study the monad, and you infer the archangel. Now, think of a human life, hidden beliefs, visible habits, actions in the world, outcomes that appear like fruit, different planes, same structure. Correspondence is a principle of intelligent inference. It teaches you how to move from what you can observe to what you can't yet see. If your outer life is chaotic, correspondence asks, where is the inner disorder? If your relationships repeat patterns, correspondence asks, what is the inner template? If your emotions swing in predictable cycles, correspondence asks, what is the deeper law operating beneath the surface? This is why the old axiom is so potent. It permits you to study one level of reality to understand another. But there's a discipline implied here too. Correspondence is powerful and also dangerous because the human mind can force patterns where none exist. So in Hermetic practice, classical or modern, the crucial difference is between symbolism that clarifies and symbolism that hypnotizes. One way to keep the principle clean is this. Correspondence doesn't mean everything is literally the same. It means structures can rhyme. And if structures rhyme, then reality becomes learnable. But how do these planes and structures rhyme in motion? The next principle declares that nothing is still. 3. The principle of vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. This is the kinetic heart of the system. It claims there is no absolute stillness. Everything is in motion, whether visible or invisible. Now in modern life, you already know this is true. Your body is alive because it moves, heartbeat, breath, circulation. Your mind is alive because it moves, thought, memory, attention. Even your identity moves. What you want at 15 isn't what you want at 25, and what you want at 40 is different again. Vibration is the principle that says, reality is made of movement and rate, and then it makes a more subtle claim. The difference between states of matter, energy, mind, and spirit are differences in degree, differences in rate, differences in vibration. Now, listen carefully to the wording because a lot of confusion comes from this part. When modern people hear vibration, they immediately think physics, frequencies, atoms, quantum language. They assume the ancient principle was predicting modern science. But a more careful analysis is this. The Hermetic is using vibration as a universal metaphor for change and gradation. It's saying, reality is not made of fixed things. Reality is made of processes. That's why it can claim that even spirit is vibration. So fast it appears still, like a wheel spinning so quickly it looks motionless. And matter, at the other end, is vibration so slow it appears stable. Between those poles are countless degrees. This is what the Hermetic wants you to feel: a continuum. Not separate worlds, not sealed categories, a sliding scale. And now the practical implication becomes obvious. If states of mind are vibrations, then the state becomes something you can adjust. Mood becomes something you can tune. Thought becomes something you can direct. That's the hidden function of this principle. It trains you to stop treating your inner world as a prison and start treating it as an instrument, not instantly, not magically, but gradually through practice. You've already felt a mundane version of this. You walk into a room after an argument, and the atmosphere feels thick. You sit with someone calm, and your mind begins to settle. You watch inspiring work, and your inner energy rises. This principle teaches something practical and powerful. If your inner state is a rate of motion, then you can change your state by changing what you feed it, what you listen to, what you repeat, what you imagine, what you rehearse internally. This is why mastery begins with attention, then expands into a state. And here's a key initiatory insight. You do not have one mind, you have ranges of mind. And vibration is how you travel between them. But if everything exists on ranges, then opposites are not enemies. They are endpoints on the same scale. That is the fourth principle. 4. The principle of polarity. Everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. Polarity is the principle that stops you from being fooled by labels. It says opposites are not separate species. They are the same thing in different degrees. Heat and cold, degrees of temperature. Light and darkness, degrees of illumination. Noise and quiet, degrees of sound. Large and small are points on a scale. Now the Hermetic move is to apply this to the mind. Love and hate are not alien substances. They are degrees on a spectrum of attachment and aversion. Fear and courage are not separate planets. They are degrees on a spectrum of perceived threat and inner stability. And if this is true, then a new possibility appears: transmutation. If you can move along a spectrum, you can transform a state into another by shifting degrees. That is the practical art hidden in this principle, not positive thinking in the shallow sense. Real polarity work is more disciplined. You locate where you are on the scale. You locate where you want to be. You begin shifting by degrees through focus, repetition, and controlled attention. This is where it introduces a classic Hermetic dream in modern language: mental alchemy. If you can shift your inner polarity, you can change your experience without changing the external facts. You can't change the weather, but you can change your stance. You can't change the past, but you can change its emotional charge. You can't change other people, but you can change how you show up, how you respond, how you escalate or calm. A common interpretation is that the Hermetic is describing emotional regulation, reframed as an occult skill. Alchemy is the art of transforming substances. Here, the substance is your own state. Now listen to this carefully, seeker, because it's a retention-worthy truth. Most people do not suffer because they feel negative emotions. They suffer because they think negative emotions are final. Polarity says, nothing is final. Everything has degrees. Everything can be shifted. And then it warns you, quietly, about extremes. Because if extremes meet, then the highest love can flip into rage when it is distorted. The deepest devotion can become obsession. So, polarity teaches you to recognize the spectrum and stop worshiping the endpoints. But now comes the next law. If there are poles, there will be movement between poles. A swing. That is rhythm. 5. The principle of rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. Rhythm is the principle that explains why you can't stay at the peak. Everything moves in cycles. Everything swings. Every tide goes out and comes back in, the rise and fall, the advance and retreat. It says the pendulum swings in everything. You see it in seasons, you see it in empires, you see it in trends, you see it in your own motivation. There are seasons when you feel unstoppable, and then seasons when everything feels heavy. There are weeks when your mind is sharp, and weeks when it feels dull. There are relationships that swell with closeness, and then pull back. Rhythm says, this is not personal failure, this is the law. But, and this is where the principle becomes a true tool, rhythm does not only describe the swing, it teaches you how not to be dragged by it. The method is poise, the art is neutralization. You learn to stand at a chosen point of polarity, so the pendulum's force doesn't throw you into extremes. This is not the same as pretending you don't feel. It's closer to building an inner anchor that remains steady even while the water moves. Modern translation, you still feel emotion, but you don't let emotion drive the wheel. You still experience cycles, but you don't worship the highs or fear the lows. You learn to ride rhythm instead of being ridden by it. If you've ever watched someone calm in a crisis, you've seen a human version of this mastery. And this is why Hermetic teaching, ancient or modern, often circles back to the same goal: self-command. Not domination over the world, but command over the internal swing. And here is a key initiatory bridge. Rhythm without awareness becomes fate. Rhythm with awareness becomes timing. When you know you're in a low tide, you don't make life-ending decisions. When you know you're in a high tide, you don't assume it will last forever. You use the law instead of being used by it. But now, we face the deeper question. A pendulum doesn't swing by magic. Something triggers motion. Something pushes cause into effect. And that brings us to the sixth principle. 6. The principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. This principle is the spine of the Hermetic worldview. This principle says, nothing just happens. Everything is connected by chains of causation, even if the chain is hidden from you. When we call something chance, the Hermetic suggests we're not describing reality, we're describing ignorance. We're naming a pattern we can't see yet. Now, you don't need metaphysics to understand the basic version of this. Modern life actually proves this daily. If you neglect your health, you get consequences. If you repeat a habit, you shape your identity. If you stay in a toxic environment, your mind changes. They are the accumulation of causes, habits, choices, influences, environments, beliefs, traumas, education, repetition. But the Hermetics adds a layered claim. It says there are planes of causation. Higher planes can dominate lower planes, meaning mental causes can shape physical outcomes. Spiritual causes can shape mental outcomes. Modern translation. A belief can produce an action. An action can produce a habit. A habit can produce a lifestyle. A lifestyle can produce a destiny. It's one thing to say your mindset changes your behavior and therefore changes results. That's observable. It's another thing to claim a purely mental state changes external matter without any intermediary chain. That enters metaphysical territory. The Hermetic promise is more subtle. It says the masters rise above the ordinary plane of cause and effect to become causers instead of effects. In plain English, most people live reactively. They are pushed by environment, by other people's moods, by suggestion, by heredity, by fear. They move like pieces on a board, but a person with awareness can step up a level. They can notice the chain and change the chain. They can alter inputs. They can refuse certain triggers. They can choose better causes, so better effects appear. So, if you want to change your effects, don't fight the fruit, change the root. That's why earlier principles matter. Mentalism shows where the root cause begins. Correspondence shows how root cause echoes across levels. Vibration shows how states shift and become momentum. Polarity shows how to transmute the state. Rhythm shows how to time the motion. Cause and effect ties the whole system into law. This is one of the most empowering parts of the system, because it reframes life as something you can participate in rather than endure. And then it leads naturally to creation. Because if you can choose causes, you can create outcomes. But how is creation described at the deepest level? That's Principle 7. 7. The principle of gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. This is the principle most likely to be misunderstood in modern ears, so we'll slow down and speak plainly. This principle is about creation. In the Hermetic philosophy, gender is not primarily a social statement. You need to separate gender as cosmic creativity from sensationalism. It's a metaphysical model of creativity. It states that all creation, physical, mental, spiritual, requires the interplay of two forces, the masculine and the feminine. On the physical plane, it links this to sex. On mental and spiritual planes, it describes it as a dynamic, a generating force and a forming force. One way to understand this without importing stereotypes is to treat masculine and feminine as functions, not identities. The masculine principle, projection, initiation, direction. The feminine principle, reception, formation, nurture, development. As two complementary motions present within reality and within you. You can see this in everything you've ever made. An idea appears. That is initiation. Then it must be held, refined, shaped. That is formation. A plan is chosen. Then it must be developed, sustained, and grown. A vision is projected. Then it must be embodied. This principle teaches that you contain both forces. Creation is always a marriage of two movements, the thrust forward and the shaping inward, and that no true creation happens without their union. If you only project, you become chaotic. Many beginnings, no completion. If you only receive, you become stagnant. Endless waiting, no initiation. Creation requires balance, and this is why this principle is last. It seals the system into action. Because after you understand mind, correspondence, motion, polarity, rhythm, and law, what remains is to generate something real, a new self, a new work, a new pattern, a new destiny, a new life, creation. And it ends with a boundary, a warning that this principle should not be dragged down into degraded interpretations. The point here is elevation, generation, regeneration, creation. So, the 7 principles complete their arc, mind at the root, correspondence between layers, vibration as motion, polarity as a spectrum, rhythm as swing, causation as a chain, gender as creative dual force, creation. That is the key. The function, why this system persists. Now we step back and ask the real question. Why has this doctrine lasted? Why do people read these principles and feel a click? Because the principles do something very specific. It turns life into something legible. It gives you a sense that confusion is not the nature of reality. Confusion is the result of not knowing the rules. And the human mind loves rules, especially when life feels chaotic. The 7 principles offer 3 psychological gifts, even if you treat them purely as philosophy. First, they reduce complexity into a map. 7 is memorable. 7 feels complete. It's small enough to hold, large enough to explain. Second, they offer a mastery narrative. They whisper, you don't have to be dragged by life's pendulum. You can build poise. You can tune your state. You can become a causer. Third, they turn the world into a symbolic classroom. Your emotions become data. Your cycles become lessons. Your conflicts become spectra. You can navigate rather than wars you must lose. And this is where the magic key metaphor becomes less mystical and more precise. A key is not a miracle. A key is a shape that matches a lock. The Hermetic claims these principles are the shape. Whether the lock is the universe itself or your own mind is the question each seeker eventually has to answer. Closing reflection. If you listen closely, these principles are not asking you to believe in magic. They are asking you to recognize the law. They are teaching you that the world you experience is shaped by mind, mirrored across levels, moved by hidden motion, divided into spectra, swung by rhythm, governed by causation. and brought into being through creative polarity. And the most tangible takeaway is this: you can actually use the seven as a diagnostic key. When life feels chaotic, you can locate the mechanism. Ask what your mind is feeding, what pattern is repeating, what state you've tuned into, what extreme you've slipped toward, what cycle you're riding, what cause you've been obeying, and what you are truly creating. That's the initiation, not memorizing words, but catching yourself in the moment, when you're being swung, when you're acting as an effect, when your inner vibration drops, when your polarity drifts, when your creative forces fall out of balance. Because the temple doors don't open for the person who recites principles. They open for the person who recognizes the lock inside their own life. And yet one question remains, quietly unresolved. Are these laws describing the structure of the universe itself? Or are they describing the structure of the human mind as it learns to master experience? Until your next step, walk the path with wisdom.